Joe Biden, why are you getting involved with my affairs in the Ukraine? Well, it's not because I want to fight for democracy. I'm fighting for my political life. My approval ratings are in the garbage, and I need to divert the American people's attention from my failures as related to domestic policy and foreign policy. You know the Ukraine is not a NATO nation. I know it's not a NATO nation, but I know I can take advantage of it because all I want to do is save my career. I want to save it. I want to save it. I mean, why can't this be like the Afghans? Why isn't it like the Afghans?
Coming to paperback and e-readers, ISIS Legacy. The sorority secrets of the goddess next door are revealed in this all-new ISIS series adventure. Pre-order your copy of ISIS Legacy on Amazon.com today.
One of my viewers wanted me to talk about the situation going on in the Ukraine. Now, last week, Russian soldiers invaded the Ukraine allegedly to stamp out Nazi supporters. Now, that argument is just completely nonsense, and according to American intelligence, what Vladimir Putin wants to do in the Ukraine is he wants to replace the current Ukraine government run by President Zelensky with a puppet government. Now, just as unethical as your Vladimir Putin is being, your Joe Biden is being just as unethical and disingenuous as related to things. Now, your Joe Biden sees your Vladimir Putin looking to be a guy trying to create a puppet government in Ukraine, but he's pulling the strings of most Americans with his whole narratives as related to the Ukraine and his selective outrage as related to the Ukraine. And I say it's selective outrage because the only reason why your Joe Biden is deciding to be so outraged about the Ukraine is basically because he needs the Ukraine to deflect from all of the failures that were a part of the first year of his first term as President of the United States. Because over the course of 2021, your Joe Biden had a complete disaster of a first year as president, and he wants to divert most Americans' attention from his failures as related to the upcoming midterms coming in 2022. And the way to divert Americans' attention from all of his failures and having them come up in a series of negative ads by Republicans is to get people caught up in their emotions about patriotism or some other cause in another land. Now, your Joe Biden has a really bad record as related to the entire first year of his presidency, and this is ammunition that candidates on the right can go out here and use against him. And the first major failure as related to the Biden presidency is his slogan, Build Back Better, because we see that nothing has been built, nothing is back, and nothing is better. In fact, Americans' lives are worse, and they can directly point to policies created by the Biden administration that made their lives worse than they were under your President Trump. Now, I am no fan of President Trump, but the quality of life in America has declined under your Joe Biden, and policies that he implemented, like canceling the Keystone XL pipeline. Now, the Keystone XL pipeline was something designed by your President Trump to establish energy independence for the United States of America. And for a brief moment, the United States was under energy independence and was creating its own oil. And that in turn led to the lowest gas prices in over 20 years. But because your Joe Biden and the leftists were in their feelings about President Trump, your Joe Biden canceled the Keystone XL pipeline, and with this cancellation, this is the reason why gas prices here in America are so expensive right now. Now, in an effort to try to overcompensate for the miscalculation as related to the Keystone XL pipeline, In the middle of summer of 2021, we had your Joe Biden begging OPEC for more oil. And that little humiliation was something that was downplayed by the mainstream media as related to Joe Biden's first failure as President of the United States. The media didn't talk about how he went out here and was begging OPEC for more oil as gas prices were soaring all across the country. Now, as your Joe Biden was begging OPEC for more oil, we also had your Joe Biden who made a big promise as related to the pandemic, saying that he was going to get everything under control, and he said he had a plan for this. Now, that plan seemed to fall completely apart in the spring of 2021 with the Delta variant, and it further collapsed as the summer went on. And it showed that your Joe Biden did not really have a direction, and that was shown with that desperate effort he made to mandate jabs to people in private businesses in September of 2021. Now, that whole jab controversy, this was something that was taken all the way to the Supreme Court, and your Joe Biden suffered a major loss earlier this year, and that was another blow to the Biden presidency, because with the Delta variant and the Omicron wave, we see that your Joe Biden didn't get the pandemic under control, and many of his statements were refuted, such as saying, oh, these jabs will prevent you from ever getting this disease, but most people wound up getting this disease even after taking jabs during the Omicron wave. And the Omicron wave actually showed that none of our so-called science we were supposed to trust was effective at stopping the waves of the pandemic. So this was another blow to the Biden presidency, and another big L that the Biden presidency took last year. Now, the other death blow to the Biden presidency was what happened in the spring and summer of 2021 with Afghanistan. Now, your Joe Biden, wanting to try to make himself appear to be better than Donald Trump, decided he was going to exit Afghanistan without a proper exit strategy. Running on emotion, your Joe Biden decided to pull troops from Afghanistan without having a proper exit strategy. Now, under a proper exit strategy, a exit would have taken at least 2 to 3 years, but because your Joe Biden wanted to spite Donald Trump, what happened was he decided to exit almost immediately, and as he was exiting, the Taliban were taking control of the country and not really caring about any of the gains that Americans made to help the Afghan people. And as a result of this disorganized effort to exit Afghanistan, what happened was many Americans were left behind, and millions of dollars in equipment was left behind. Now, the whole Afghanistan debacle, where the Taliban took power in Afghanistan, was the beginning of the end of the Biden presidency as related to things, and Joe Biden's approval ratings really started to drop as related to his Afghanistan failure, and that was where your Joe Biden was seen as having his first major foreign policy failure. This was combined with him not being able to manage the pandemic or being able to go out here and deal with the energy crisis. He practically created these problems, and this made things a lot worse for your Joe Biden, leading to him starting to have his approval ratings drop further and further, and this was one of the things that led to him having serious problems. Now, in addition to the whole issue of energy issues, Afghanistan, and the pandemic, America was dealing with inflation. Now, this inflation is another direct result of the pandemic, because your leftists wanted to give Americans money to take care of themselves during the pandemic lockdowns that they said we desperately needed. Now, the left pushed these lockdowns and pushed giving Americans the extended unemployment, but what they didn't really understand was basic economics. If you saturate a country with lots of money, that's going to lead to the value of those dollars starting to decline. And that's what happened during the Biden presidency. As there was so much money in the economy, this is what led to the value of the dollar dropping, and we also started to see supply chain issues as related to the worker shortage and the Great Resignation. Now, all of these policies can directly be tied to the leftist Congress, and your Joe Biden, the head of the executive branch, he really didn't have a plan for dealing with any of these consequences of the actions of the Congress, because the Congress was in its feelings about President Trump and not thinking about the long-term consequences of the Biden presidency would have to deal with. And that inflation has really hurt a lot of Americans who were, during the pandemic, flush with lots of cash, but now are struggling because the price of everything has gone up due to there, one, being so much money, and two, there being so few supplies due to, one, not enough workers being around, because we lost a lot of workers who wound up putting in their retirement. A lot of the baby boomers put in their retirement, and a lot of other people just don't want to work for these companies like they used to before the pandemic. And your Joe Biden and his policies have not really helped out in this situation. In fact, he's made things worse with things like his jab mandate, which further exacerbated a lot of the worker shortages and made things a lot worse for people. Now, all of these problems as related to the Biden presidency have become a major problem, and in order to get out from under all of those problems, what your Joe Biden wanted to do was he wanted to find a distraction to keep Americans from being focused on his numerous failures. And the reason why he did that is because he needs to get Americans emotional about some other political cause so that they don't have to point a finger at all of his numerous domestic failures and his foreign policy failures. Now, nothing has been built back better under the Biden presidency, and after seeing many of his agendas fall completely apart due to even members of his own party seeing them as ridiculous, like Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, what has happened is your Biden is desperate for a win, because his approval rating is now at currently 37%. So this is why he is so focused on the Ukraine. And there's nothing he can really do about the Ukraine, because the Ukraine is not a NATO nation. And that's the thing most people aren't really paying attention to, because they're getting caught up in their emotions regarding the rhetoric of the Ukraine. The U.S. cannot do anything about the Ukraine because the Ukraine is not a NATO nation, and because they are not a part of NATO, the U.S. can't do anything about what's going on. But they can use that rhetoric to get people emotional and riled up and keep them from focusing on the failures of the Biden presidency. So this is basically a deflection to keep you from being focused on what's really going on with the failures of the Biden presidency, and all of these failures are directly the result of Biden policies. So what he wants to do is turn Vladimir Putin into a boogeyman, and your Vladimir Putin's hands are just as dirty as Joe Biden's. But the whole thing is, he knows there's nothing he can do but use this to try to get people emotional and get them diverted from the failures of white supremacy here in America. Now, your Vladimir Putin is equally trying to run the same game that your Joe Biden is doing, with the Ukraine. But your Vladimir Putin is basically an old boomer stuck in the past, and what he wants to do is he wants to invade the Ukraine in an effort to try to so-called rebuild the Soviet Union. Now, the Soviet Union has been a failure since 1953 when your Joseph Stalin died. And ever since Joseph Stalin passed away, the USSR has been in a state of decline. Now, most people don't know that the USSR was in a state of decline, but it was falling apart ever since your Stalin passed away because his grand plan for a state was falling apart as soon as his leaders, his underlings, could not manage the situation, and it just fell apart over the course of 40 years as that big bloated bureaucracy wound up struggling to maintain itself. The USSR, which was a whole bunch of states, had a whole lot of bureaucracy, and many of the 5-year plans didn't go according to plan. And because there was so much corruption, fraud, and waste, eventually the USSR wound up falling. But there were many who longed for the old days of the Soviet Union, like your Vladimir Putin, and they're trying to go back to those old days because many of these old men know that they don't have much time on this earth, and they want to have some big accomplishment before they leave this earth to be their legacy. And that's basically why your Vladimir Putin is invading Ukraine. It's all about his arrogant ego and his arrogance, because all he wants to do is bring back that era of communism, similar to the way some white supremacists here in America want to bring back that era of the antebellum South, and the good old Southern tradition. Now, these eras have been outdated for decades, and these approaches to government and economics have been rendered obsolete. But these men want to hold on to these old ways because this is all that they know, and because it's all that they know, they fear going into a changing world. And the same thing can be said about your Joe Biden. He also is afraid of dealing with a changing world, and he cannot deal with the changing world, so he tries to divert your attention with this whole thing as related to the Ukraine. So the Ukraine is basically being used as a political pawn by your Joe Biden, and it's also being used by your Vladimir Putin to deal with the fact that he can no longer manage the country anymore, and he can't deal with change. So what I really see with both your Joe Biden and your Vladimir Putin is that neither man can deal with a changing world. These are old men who are still stuck in the past, and this is all part of another symptom I'm seeing as related to these baby boomers who just cannot deal with the fact that they are having to deal with the fear of their own mortality, the fear that they are going to leave this world, and the fear that the world has changed around them. All of these things are the main reasons why all of this is going on, and I believe one of the big things is it's just a bunch of old men who don't want to deal with a changing world, so they're trying to change it back to the way it was. That's on the Putin side. But on the Biden side, I'm seeing that your Joe Biden just doesn't want to deal with any of the failures he has made. So what he wants to do is try to play a political game where he makes it all about he's so concerned about the Ukraine, but the real thing that he's concerned about is his approval ratings cratering, and he's concerned about losing the House and the Senate in the 2022 midterms. So what he wants to do is try to use this whole Ukraine situation to try to garner some sympathy from the American people and get them all behind a so-called patriotic message. And he believes if he gets them behind this patriotic message, what will happen is they'll get so emotional they won't participate in the red tsunami that your Joe Biden knows is coming. and it'll hopefully stave off some of those voters and prevent a 2022 bloodbath that will be worse than what happened in 1994. Now, in 1994, under the Bill Clinton, we had a bloodbath where many of these leftists, the blue states, turned red, and even core states that were blue for years, like New York and other places, turned red due to the new decades of failed policies that were implemented by blue state governors and blue state politicians. And as a result, we saw a major revolution when your Newt Gingrich came along and Trent Lott came along with the contract with America, and that practically derailed Bill Clinton's whole agenda for his first term and even his second term. So that's what Joe Biden fears happening here with his first term. He fears that there's going to be a bloodbath coming here in America due to his year of just plain failure all around, and he fears that there will be a red tidal wave, and that's one of the things that has him terrified, and that's why he needs to use the Ukraine, similar to the way Bill Clinton did use your Bosnia back in the 90s and failed miserably. Now, these playbooks are the exact same playbook, and the sad part is your Joe Biden, he's trying to make us believe that this is all about him fighting for democracy, but no, he's fighting for his political survival because his approval rating is in the garbage, and his numbers are polling lower than LBJ in 1968 during the height of the Tet Offensive. So that's what's happening with Joe Biden right now, and why he's so passionate about this. It's not about the Ukrainian people, it's all about his polling numbers, and it's looking like it's not really working, and that's what's the whole thing that's got your Joe Biden scared. He's trying to make it all about, it's about democracy in the Ukraine, but your Joe Biden is basically using the situation to go out here and take advantage of the American people, and this is no different than what was done before. Now, what's going on here with the Ukraine, again, this is just, again, a whole bunch of theater, a whole bunch of drama, and it's all about making Americans get emotional and get on a so-called patriotic narrative, and that's what this is really all about, so that they will go out here and vote blue in 2022 and not really see the game run on them, and then them being stuck in a whole quagmire where nothing is built back, nothing is better, and America is stuck in a lost direction place under your joker, Joe Biden. Now, I hope this answers the viewers' request as related to what's going on in Ukraine. Now, I really feel for the people in Ukraine who have to suffer as a result of this, and it's not right that they have to deal with all of this going on, but the whole thing is that this is just old desperate men trying to build their legacies, and sadly they want to build their legacies on the backs of the people. And that's the sad part about this whole situation going on in Ukraine, is that people are being used as pawns for a bunch of old boomer leaders who want to bust the lives of others because they don't want to move anything forward, and they don't want to move out of the old ideologies that they have. Now, if you want, this video is not going to be monetized, so if you could donate to the Cash App or the Patreon or the PayPal, would be greatly appreciated. Or if you could pick up some of the books on the SJS Direct Imprint, that would also be appreciated, because that also helps keep the channel going. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.
Now available in paperback and Kindle, Stop Simping in Cyberspace. Learn how to avoid predatory females like Instagram models and e-girls in their virtual con games with Stop Simping in Cyberspace. Get your copy of Stop Simping in Cyberspace in paperback and Kindle today.